Welcome to Long Stories for Sleep. Just set me playing, relax, and drift off. Maybe you'll dream about the story I'm telling you. Subscribe and you'll have a library of stories to choose from. Comment to let me know where in the world you are and what stories you would like added. That's really helpful information. Enough rambling. On with the story. I know you'll love it even if you don't reach the end.
The Taming of the Shrew, a story for sleep, based on the play by William Shakespeare. Chapter 1. The Courtship Game. In the city of Padua, where scholars roamed and merchants bartered under sun-washed arches, a certain question occupied more than a few minds. Who could possibly marry Katherina Minola, the elder daughter of the wealthy? Baptista, Katherina was as sharp-tongued as she was sharp-witted. She spoke her mind like a sword, precise and without apology, and few were the men who could endure more than a few minutes of her pointed truths. Bianca, her younger sister, was of a gentler sort. Sweet, modest, and eager to please, she had drawn suitors from across the city and beyond. But Baptista had decreed firmly that no man could court Bianca until Katherina was wed. This strange barrier turned the sweet girl into a kind of prize locked behind a dragon of a sister, and so suitors were left pacing the streets in frustration or plotting desperate schemes. Among them was Lucentio, a young nobleman from Pisa, newly arrived in Padua, with his loyal servant, Tranio. He had come to study, or so he claimed. But when his eyes fell upon Bianca in the market square, his scholarly ambitions evaporated. Love at first sight seized him so fully that he resolved to disguise himself as a humble tutor to gain access to her heart. Tranio, ever clever and ever willing, agreed to pose as Lucentio in public, allowing his master to move freely in secret. Meanwhile, another man named Hortensio, himself once a suitor of Bianca, found himself similarly thwarted by Baptista's condition. With Bianca off limits, Hortensio turned his attention toward finding a man brave or foolish enough to marry Katherina. Enter Petruchio. Petruchio of Verona was not a man easily daunted. Loud of voice, large of gesture, and full of schemes, he arrived in Padua with coin in his purse and mischief in his eye. He came not for love, but for wealth. Upon hearing of Baptista's elder daughter and her rich dowry, Petruchio laughed and declared he would woo her. To those who warned him of her temper, he replied with even greater gusto. "I'll tame her," he said, "if she were as cursed as Socrates' Xanthippe." So it was arranged. Hortensio, eager to clear the path to Bianca, offered to present Petruchio to Baptista. Disguised as a music teacher, he planned to sneak glimpses of Bianca while Petruchio stormed the gates of Katherina's heart, or at least her household. When Baptista met Petruchio, he was delighted. Here, at last, was a man who did not flinch at Katherina's name. He welcomed the stranger warmly, offering his blessing should his daughter consent. Petruchio, confident to the point of arrogance, declared he needed no consent. He would win her whether she agreed or not. And so came the first meeting. Katherina, finding herself summoned like a lamb to slaughter, met Petruchio with all her thorns bared. She mocked, she challenged, she cut him down with wit and scorn. Yet Petruchio was undeterred. Every insult she hurled he turned to flattery. Every jibe he twisted into affection. "You are the kindest Kate," he said, smiling, "for daintiest Kate in the world. Hearing thy mildness praised in every town, thy virtues spoke of and thy beauty sounded, yet not so deeply as to thee belongs, I find thee gentle, comely, sweet." She was taken aback, not charmed, not softened, but intrigued by his nerve. No man had dared to face her this way, to spar with her like an equal, to match wit for wit without fear. Still, she did not yield. She left the room fuming, and Petruchio, undaunted, turned to Baptista. "We are agreed," he said. "On Sunday, we shall be married." Thus began the game, a courtship not of romance, but of challenge. And though Katherina had not yet spoken the words, the wheels of fate had turned. In a city of secrets and disguises, love took strange forms, and perhaps, just perhaps, something truer than taming lay ahead. Chapter 2. The unwilling bride Sunday arrived, and with it came a flurry of excitement and apprehension that stirred the air of Padua like a restless wind. The city's bells pealed and the streets bustled as news spread. Petruchio was to wed Katherina. Curiosity and disbelief moved through the crowds. Some whispered wagers about whether the wedding would truly occur, while others imagined Katherina's fury boiling over at the altar. In the Minola household, preparations unfolded with anxious energy. Baptista paced the halls, his joy tempered by concern. Bianca, ever sweet and subdued, offered gentle words to her sister, which were met with a glance that held neither gratitude nor hostility, but a cool detachment. Katherina had said nothing to confirm or deny her willingness. Her silence was an enigma. She went through the motions of preparing for her wedding, accepting the dress that had been laid out, permitting the servants to attend her hair. Her eyes, however, held the distance of a woman watching herself from afar. She had not agreed, yet neither had she refused. The strange truth lingered in the air. Petruchio had declared their betrothal, and she had not denied him. Was it defiance? Was it curiosity? Or merely resignation? As the appointed hour approached, the guests gathered at the church. Lucentio, in his guise as a tutor, stood with a bowed head, using the occasion as a pretext to be near Bianca. Tranio, performing his role as Lucentio, watched all with a calculating eye. Hortensio fidgeted, worried for his own prospects. Baptista stood by the altar, his brow creased with impatience, for the groom was late. The crowd began to murmur. A wedding without a groom was no wedding at all. Then, with a sound like thunder crashing into a feast, Petruchio arrived. He rode up to the church in a ridiculous display. His horse mismatched, his clothes inside out, his boots muddy, his sword swinging like a pendulum at his side. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Some laughed, others gaped. But Petruchio dismounted with the swagger of a man who believed himself perfectly dressed. "To me she's married, not unto my clothes," he boomed. "If she be fond of me, what care I how I come?" Baptista was mortified, but Petruchio would not be swayed. He marched into the church, demanding the ceremony begin. Katherina, to her credit, neither fled nor protested. Her eyes narrowed, her mouth a tight line, but she took her place beside him. The priest began to speak, but Petruchio interrupted constantly, correcting, joking, mocking the rites. When the priest asked if Katherina would take Petruchio, she hesitated only a heartbeat before answering with cool finality, "I do." When asked the same, Petruchio shouted his affirmation and sealed it with a kiss so loud and forceful it echoed off the stone walls. The ceremony over, Baptista insisted upon a wedding feast, but Petruchio refused to stay. "We'll away," he declared. "My business calls me home. She is my goods, my chattels. She is my house, my household stuff, my field, my barn." The words, spoken loudly before the guests, sent a ripple of discomfort through the hall. Katherina protested. "I will not go today," she said, standing her ground for the first time that day. But Petruchio paid her no heed. "Nay then," he said, "I will be master of what is mine own. She is my wife, my goods, my anything, and here I mean to take her hence." What followed was chaos. Katherina was swept away from her own wedding feast, struggling and protesting as Petruchio whisked her from the church, out of Padua, and toward his home in Verona. It was not love that pulled them forward, but something far more volatile. Clash of wills, a contest of fire and steel. The journey was long and the road rough. Rain soaked them, mud splashed high upon their clothes, and still Petruchio pressed on. Katherina's patience wore thin. She raged, she cried, she fell silent, but Petruchio responded only with laughter, stories, and proclamations of love delivered in jest. When they arrived at his house, it was late and cold. The servants were unprepared. The food was burnt, the bed unmade. Petruchio refused it all. He sent the food away, claiming it was unfit for his bride. He raged at the servants, saying none were good enough to tend to her. Katherina, exhausted and famished, was offered nothing. This, then, was his plan. Not to tame with cruelty, but to turn her world upon its head. If she raged, he would praise her. If she obeyed, he would feign displeasure. If she asked for comfort, he would deny it out of exaggerated concern. "She shall thank me for this," he said to the audience of his servants. "This is the way to kill a wife with kindness." And so the first days of their marriage unfolded in this strange ballet of contradiction. Katherina, stripped of familiar ground, found herself in a place where resistance was met not with anger, but with absurdity. She was no longer sure of the rules nor even the game, and in that uncertainty, a new awareness began to stir, not submission, but perception. This man, this fool, this storm of laughter and fire, had not broken her spirit, but he had turned her mirror. And so the unwilling bride, who had once held the city at bay with her defiance, now stood alone in a house where the rules had changed. The taming, if it was a taming, had begun, not with blows, but with bafflement. And in that strange silence something shifted deep within. Chapter 3. The tamer and the storm days turned to weeks, and still the tempest did not settle. At Petruchio's country house, the clash of stubborn wills echoed louder than any thunderclap. Servants crept about on tiptoe, meals arrived and departed, untouched, and laughter often gave way to frustrated silence. Petruchio, ever theatrical, persisted in his campaign of paradox, denying comfort out of professed love and heaping praise where none was expected. Katherina, for her part, met this with alternating fury and bewilderment. She did not know how to fight a man who met outrage with joy. One evening, after a day of cold rooms and colder meals, Katherina sat alone in a corner, staring at the fire that barely crackled. The shadows flickered on the walls like dancers performing a sad pantomime. Petruchio entered, his boots still wet from a walk, and dropped beside her with his usual flair. "Is not the fire warm, dearest Kate?" he asked with mock tenderness. She glanced at him, her face unreadable. "The fire is smoke, the food is wind, and my husband is folly." "Then I am pleased," he said, "for folly is divine when served in such company." She turned away, fighting back a response. Every insult she offered was met with affection, every truth twisted until it no longer resembled itself. In this world he'd built, language had lost its edges. How, then, was she to speak? Petruchio stood and summoned the servants, declaring that supper was ready. A roast was brought in. Perfectly cooked, fragrant, and steaming. Katherina reached for a plate, but Petruchio stopped her. "Not fit for you," he said. "Too burnt, too coarse. Away with it." The roast vanished, taken back to the kitchen. "But I am hungry," she said, her voice tight. "Then you shall be fed," he replied. "But only what is worthy of you. And this beastly meal, offends me on your behalf." That night she went to bed without supper once more. Yet in her heart, something curious stirred, not just anger or pride, but a glimmer of understanding. He was not striking her, nor shouting her into silence. He was undermining her world, until she no longer knew where to stand. And through that confusion she saw his eyes, still playful, still bright, not cruel, but determined. The next morning brought another trial. Petruchio announced they would return to Padua, for Bianca was to be married, and they must attend the wedding feast. Katherina, eager to escape the madhouse of his estate, welcomed the idea. At once Petruchio ordered for them to ride out, but even this journey was a test. As they rode through the countryside, Petruchio pointed to the sun high in the sky and declared it the moon. Katherina frowned. "It is the sun," she said simply. "2. Say it is the moon," he replied. "Then you lie," she snapped. "I say it is the moon, and therefore it is. And if you are to journey with me, you shall agree." She hesitated. A dozen retorts rose in her throat. But what did they matter? What would it prove? She looked at him, this man who twisted the sky and the earth beneath it, and exhaled. "Then it is the moon," she said. He smiled. "No, it is the sun." She laughed, truly laughed, for the first time in weeks. Not a derisive chuckle, not a bitter scoff, but a laugh from deep within. He had drawn her into the game, and she had played, and for a moment, they were not enemies but companions in absurdity. Thus they continued, their journey unfolding as a dance between jest and surrender. Katherina no longer reacted with rage but with calculation. She began to see his strategy not as cruelty, but as confrontation, a challenge to redefine power and pride. In Padua, Bianca's wedding approached with pomp and promise. Lucentio had, through trickery and perseverance, won her heart. Tranio, ever loyal and clever, managed the tangled web of impersonations and contracts until all had fallen into place. Even Hortensio had conceded defeat and wed a wealthy widow, content at last to bow out of the race for Bianca. Katherina and Petruchio arrived just in time for the feast. The household swelled with music, wine, and laughter, yet the return of the stormy couple caused a hush to fall over the guests. Many stared, waiting for Katherina to explode, to humiliate her husband, to reclaim her title as Padua's fiercest daughter. But she did not. She sat beside Petruchio, calm and composed, and spoke with grace. Her father watched in wonder, her sister in disbelief. It was at that moment that Petruchio, with theatrical flair, proposed a wager. "Let us see," he said to the gathered husbands, "whose wife is most obedient. Each of us shall send for our bride, and she who comes most promptly shall win her husband 50 crowns. Lucentio sent for Bianca. She declined, claiming she was too busy. Hortensio sent for his wife, and she laughed at the idea of obeying a summons. Petruchio sent for Katherina, and she came. She walked in with steady steps and eyes that held both calm and fire. To her astonished audience, she not only answered her husband's call, but delivered a speech on the virtues of peace and duty within marriage. She spoke not with submission, but with insight, an understanding of roles, of partnership, of power shared and wielded with care. "My hand is ready," she said at last, "if yours is willing to meet it." Petruchio took her hand, not as a master claims possession, but as a man reaching toward an equal. In that moment the storm broke, not in surrender, but in clarity. What had begun as a contest had become something else entirely, a reckoning, a reframing, perhaps even a love forged not from sweetness but from steel. The guests applauded, confused and amazed. Baptista wept. Bianca watched, uncertain now who had truly won, and Petruchio, triumphant, turned to the crowd. "Who's the shrew now?" he asked with a grin. But the truth was plain to see. There was no shrew anymore, only a woman who had found her voice in the unlikeliest of echoes, and a man who had dared to listen in the language of madness. Thus ended the courtship of Katherina Minola, not with a tamed woman, but with a matched pair, tempest and tamer, storm and sky. The True Chapter 4. The wedding feast in the Wager Padua was awash with celebration, its streets threaded with garlands and echoing with laughter. The wedding of Bianca Minola and Lucentio had stirred the town into a jubilant whirl of music, silk, and expectation. The house of Baptista bustled like a hive, its halls bright with torchlight and filled with the perfume of spring blossoms, imported spices, and rich wines. Guests arrived in droves, dressed in their finest, their voices raised in merriment and gossip. Yet even amidst the revelry, one topic ruled the conversation: the return of Katherina and Petruchio. The tale of their tempestuous courtship had already woven itself into Padua's tapestry of lore. Whispers trailed after them like the tail of a comet, tales of Katherina's fury and Petruchio's audacity, of weddings interrupted and banquets boycotted. And now they were to be seen again, together. Many expected spectacle, few imagined transformation. Katherina arrived at the feast in a gown of soft amber, her hair drawn back, not in submission, but in serenity. She walked beside Petruchio, her steps unhurried, her expression composed. At her side, Petruchio wore his usual swagger, but something in his bearing had shifted. His touch on her arm was no longer performative but protective, not possessive but respectful. The couple stepped into the great hall, and a hush followed. All eyes turned to them, then quickly turned away, pretending not to stare. But the truth was evident. Katherina did not resist his company. She did not glower nor protest, nor offer barbs to slash at pride. Instead, she smiled, a quiet, knowing smile that unsettled and intrigued. Baptista was the first to approach, his face a study, in disbelief and hope. "Welcome, daughter," he said cautiously. "And you, good son." Katherina bowed her head slightly. "Father," and nothing more. It was enough. For her silence no longer screamed, it breathed. As the feast began, music rang from lutes, and viols and dancers moved like colored ribbons through the candlelit hall. Lucentio beamed beside Bianca, who radiated joy, her laughter like bells. Even Hortensio seemed content, seated beside his new wife, a sharp-tongued widow with wealth enough to soothe any bruised ego. As goblets clinked and courses flowed from roast venison to honeyed pastries, the tension eased. But Petruchio, never one to let a stage sit empty, stood with a flourish and raised his cup. "My lords and friends," he called out, silencing the room with the magnetism of theater. "What say you to a wager?" Lucentio raised an eyebrow. "What sort of wager?" "A test of wits and wills," said Petruchio. "Let each of us send for our wives, and she who comes most swiftly, most obediently, shall win her husband 50 crowns. The men chuckled, and the women rolled their eyes. But the game was set. Lucentio called for Bianca. A servant went, then returned with a smile fading fast. "My lord, the lady says she is engaged in conversation and cannot be disturbed." Laughter bubbled around the hall. Hortensio sent next. His servant returned with a shrug. "Madam says, you know where to find her, and if you want her presence you may fetch it yourself." The laughter grew louder. At last, Petruchio gestured with a nod. "Go to my wife," he told his man, "and bid her come to me." Murmurs spread. Bets were placed. Faces leaned in, alert. Moments passed, long enough for doubt to seed. Then, footsteps. Katherina entered the hall. The guests gasped, some in awe, some in disbelief. She walked with measured grace to her husband's side and curtsied. "You called, my lord?" Petruchio beamed. "Indeed, and not for me alone, but for these noble men and ladies to witness what gentleness may dwell in the fiercest soul." He turned to her, eyes twinkling. "Speak, sweet Kate. Let them hear your thoughts on duty and love." Katherina looked around the hall. She did not shrink. Her voice was clear, her tone composed. "It is not weakness to honor one's husband, nor is it strength to war without end. The sun and moon share the same sky. To argue over which rules the day is folly. There is power in peace, and peace in understanding. If I lay my hand beneath my husband's foot, it is not as servant, but as partner, equal in dignity, though different in design." A silence fell, rich with revelation. She turned to Petruchio. "And if you ask for my hand, I offer it freely." He took it, not with pride, but reverence. The hall erupted. Cheers mixed with stunned murmurs. Baptista wept openly, dabbing his eyes with a lace cloth. Bianca sat still, her fingers entwined with Lucentio's, unsure what to make of her sister's serenity. Hortensio frowned, and his widow rolled her eyes. Later, as the guests danced and the wine flowed, Petruchio and Katherina stepped out onto the balcony. The moon was full, the air soft. "You meant what you said," he whispered. "I did," she replied, "but only because you taught me how to mean it." "And you, me," he said. She smiled. "Then we are even." And beneath that moon, the storm was finally still. Chapter 5. A New Harmony. The days following the wedding feast settled into a gentle rhythm, as though a long-held breath had finally been released. Padua, ever bustling, seemed to glow with a curious warmth in the spring air, the sun dappling, through budding trees and the smell of orange blossoms, mingling with the laughter of market vendors. In the Manola household, there was a change, not abrupt but unfolding like a dawn, slow and golden. The servants, who had once hurried past Katherina with anxious eyes and whispered judgments, now watched her with tentative respect. Her temper no longer ruled the rooms. She moved quietly, thoughtfully, with her sleeves rolled up and her voice soft but firm. Petruchio, for his part, was not tamed in the conventional sense. His wit remained sharp, his presence large and theatrical, yet something in him had softened, not weakened, but grown wiser. He no longer sought victory in every exchange, but rather communion. They walked together often, through vineyards, or along the city walls, speaking in a language that was equal parts jest and earnestness. They disagreed still, as all strong minds do. But now the sparks lit candles instead of fires. Katherina found herself smiling at moments she never would have noticed before. The way Petruchio bowed exaggeratedly to a goose, pretending it were nobility. How he waited in silence while she chose apricots at the market, only to whisper later that none were so sweet as her scowl when she haggled. She laughed more now, not in mockery, but in surprise, at him, at herself, at the world suddenly, turned lighter. It was on one such afternoon that they visited Baptista again. The old man greeted them with both joy and disbelief. "I scarce know you, daughter," he murmured as he kissed her cheek, "but I have never been so glad to be mistaken." Katherina looked at him with a steadiness that had always been hers, but was, now tempered by grace. "Perhaps you knew me too little before, father." They took tea in the garden, where Bianca and Lucentio soon joined them. The sisters sat across from one another, a space that once bristled with rivalry now hushed and open. Bianca watched her sister cautiously, trying to reconcile this poised woman with the girl who had stormed and seethed. "You seem changed," she offered. Katherina sipped her tea. "Perhaps I am. Or perhaps I've only stopped shouting." Lucentio raised his brows. "And has the world listened more kindly in return?" "No," Katherina replied, "but I've found I care less about its opinion and more about its company." There was a pause, one of those rare silences that held no tension, only possibility. Bianca leaned forward. "And are you happy?" Katherina looked at Petruchio, who grinned at her over the rim of his cup, eyes twinkling. "I am learning what happiness looks like, one day at a time." In the days that followed, the couple returned to Petruchio's estate, where the fields awaited tilling and the roof awaited mending. But the land, like its master, seemed invigorated. Petruchio's servants, who had once quaked before his temper and Katherina's wrath, now moved with something approaching ease. Grumio, ever dramatic, declared to the cook that he'd been caught in a spell. "The shrew hath turned into a dove," he muttered, "and yet she still bites when needed." Together, husband and wife tackled the tasks of the household, not divided by roles, but by strengths. Katherina took to the books and accounts, her sharp mind reveling in the balance of numbers. Petruchio worked the grounds with a theatrical flourish, charming laborers and suppliers alike with bawdy tales and a booming laugh. One evening, after a long day spent inspecting the vineyards, they sat beneath an arbor, watching the sky bleed orange and lavender. A quiet fell between them, the kind that does not need filling. "You never did break me," Katherina said at length. Petruchio looked at her sidelong. "Would you believe me if I said I never meant to?" She considered this. "No, but I believe you. Stop trying." "You were never meant to be broken, Kate," he said, more serious than she expected. "Only heard." And there, in that moment, they understood each other fully. Not as conqueror and conquered, but as two storms that had found a way to blow in the same direction. The shrew was not tamed, she was known, and perhaps that was the greater triumph. Chapter 6. Reflections by firelight in the warm glow of Petruchio's hearth. Days after the wedding feast, Katherina sat quietly beside the fire, the flames painting flickering gold on her face. Outside, winter was settling across the countryside, its breath frosting the panes and quieting the world. But within the stone walls of their home, there was only the murmur of logs cracking and the occasional sigh of the wind. It was in this hush that Katherina found a rare stillness, not silence born of suppression, but of deep thought, of change stirring like coals beneath ash. Petruchio entered quietly, carrying a tray with 2 steaming cups of spiced wine. He set it on the table between them and took the seat opposite her. Neither spoke for a moment. They no longer rushed to fill silences. Rather, they let them stretch, as one does with a favored blanket on a cold night. "You're very far away," Petruchio said at last. Katherina turned to him, her eyes reflecting the firelight, only far from where I once stood. He nodded slowly. Do you miss her? The woman who snarled at suitors and stormed through halls like a tempest? She tilted her head. Sometimes. But I think she was angry because she thought no one was listening. I shouted so loudly because I feared being unheard. He looked at her for a long time. And now? Now, I believe I am heard, she said. Even when I whisper. Outside, snow began to fall, delicate and hushed. Inside, Katherina rose and walked slowly to a small shelf near the hearth. She lifted a worn volume, a gift from Petruchio during their courtship, though she'd only begun reading it recently. Do you know what I've been reading? She asked. I hope it's not another volume of Italian insults. She smiled. No, it's poetry. Gentle words, not meant to cut. He raised an eyebrow. From a woman who once wielded sarcasm like a sword, this is treason. Perhaps, she said, settling again beside him. But I've found that gentleness holds its own kind of strength. They sipped their wine in quiet companionship, the heat of the fire wrapping around them. Petruchio leaned back, watching the way. The light danced on the beams above. You've changed, he said. We've both changed, she corrected. You're not the man who starved me for pride or dressed in madness to prove a point. He looked away. I only meant to break through, to find the woman hidden beneath the armor. You did, she said. But you should know, I still carry the sword. I've simply chosen not to draw it, he chuckled. Fair enough. There was a pause. Do you think people can truly change? She asked. I think people can choose to become more of who they are, he replied, and less of what the world forced them to be. Katherina considered this. Then I've chosen to be less angry and more whole. He lifted his cup in salute. To wholeness. They drank. Later the conversation turned to lighter things, village gossip, the antics of Lucentio and Bianca, the pompous blunders of Hortensio. But always it returned to themselves, to the delicate unraveling and reweaving of their lives. Theirs had not been a love born of moonlit serenades or languid glances. It had been forged in fire, tempered by laughter, by argument, by endurance. As the hour grew late, Petruchio pulled a small package from his coat. A gift, he said, offering it to her. She opened it carefully. Inside was a comb carved from cherry wood. Simple, but elegant. To keep your hair out of your eyes when you read, he said. She touched the comb gently. You see me. I try to, he replied. Every day. She leaned over and kissed his cheek. Later still, as the fire dimmed to embers and the world outside vanished beneath a thick white quilt, Katherina rested her head against Petruchio's shoulder. I used to think love was weakness, she murmured. And now? She closed her eyes. Now I know it's the place we come home to when the battle's over. He didn't speak. He only held her closer, letting the quiet say what words never could. And, in that silence warm and flickering, two hearts once at war now beat as one. Chapter 7. The lesson at Padua. With winter mellowing into a tender spring, Petruchio and Katherina made their way to Padua, where Lucentio and Bianca were hosting a gathering to celebrate both their recent marriage and the slow thaw of the seasons. The road to Padua was alive with bird call and soft breezes. Buds swelled on branches, and wildflowers nodded in ditches, waking from their winter slumber. Katherina rode with a relaxed grace, the stiff posture of her earlier days now softened by comfort and confidence. She laughed more easily, and though her wit remained sharp, it was tempered with warmth. Petruchio, riding beside her, watched her with quiet pride, though he still bore the expression of a man who anticipated surprises at every turn. Padua greeted them with banners and bustle. Lucentio's house was filled with laughter and music, and Bianca, radiant and ever graceful, welcomed them like family. But it was not long before talk turned to the rumors that still clung to Katherina's name like brambles, the shrew who had been tamed, the battle of wills. The woman turned docile. Over supper, amid flickering candlelight and the gentle hum of conversation, Hortensio raised a cup and grinned at Petruchio. So the lioness lies down with the shepherd now? Tell us, Petruchio, how did you do it? What spell did you cast to turn thunder into song? The table laughed, but Katherina's smile cooled. Petruchio reached for her hand beneath the table, but she gently pulled it away. She rose. If you truly wish to know how I was tamed, she said, perhaps it is better to ask how I learned to tame myself. The room hushed. Even the minstrels in the corner lowered their lutes. I was never a beast, she continued. Only a woman told too often to quiet down, to smile more, to step aside. I lashed out because the world gave me no room to stretch. And then this man, she gestured to Petruchio, gave me challenge instead of chains. Petruchio opened his mouth but thought better and let her speak. He wore absurd clothes, starved me with stubbornness, tested my patience to its edge. But not because he wished to break me. He wanted to see if I could bend. And I did. But I did not break. She paused. He taught me that strength needn't roar to be real, and I taught him that love needn't dominate to endure. The guests stared, some with awe, others with discomfort. Bianca blinked, clearly unsure whether to applaud or retreat. But Lucentio, perhaps softened by his own lessons in love, raised his cup. To bending, not breaking. The room followed suit. Glasses clinked. Katherina sat again, her back straight, her eyes fierce but kind. Petruchio leaned in. You didn't need to do that. I did, she replied. Not for them, for me. I won't be. A myth, Petruchio. Not even a flattering one. Later that evening, as lanterns bobbed in the courtyard and music resumed beneath the stars, the couple wandered away from the crowd. They found themselves beneath a blossoming tree, the petals like drifting snow above. Do you regret anything? He asked. I regret waiting so long to forgive myself, she said. And perhaps for biting you that one time. He laughed. I did deserve it. They stood there in easy silence, the world around them spinning with stories and music and spring. Within, they had written their own tale, not of taming but of transformation. Not of defeat, but discovery. And when Petruchio took her hand again, she let him, because now it was offered in partnership, not possession. They turned back toward the lights, ready to rejoin the world. But their journey, though shared, remained their own. One of fire, of frost, of fierce love and earned peace. A lesson not in silence but in speaking from the heart. Chapter 8. A Quiet Triumph. Summer settled over the hills of Verona like a soft hymn, the days long and golden, the evenings warm with the hush of crickets. Katherina stood at the edge of a quiet orchard behind her and Petruchio's home, her fingers brushing the low-hanging boughs of fruit trees. The sun filtered through the leaves in dappled patches, painting her in light. There had been no grand celebration, no trumpets to herald the change in her, and yet she felt victorious, as if some invisible crown now rested lightly on her brow. In town, gossip still buzzed like flies around a feast. There were those who said she had been conquered, that the Shrew was now a shadow of her former self. Others insisted she was simply biding her time, waiting to strike again. But those who truly knew her, which were few and fiercely cherished, saw the truth. Katherina had not been subdued. She had been unveiled. Inside, Petruchio was repairing a broken chair with uncharacteristic patience. His manner had mellowed. The proud, performative energy that had marked their first encounters had softened into something steadier, more grounded. He looked up when she entered, her face bright from the orchard sun. You've been out long, he said. I lose track of time when I'm among the trees. He nodded. A dangerous place, then, she smiled. For those who fear stillness. He set his tools aside. And what did you find today, my love? Peace. And the knowledge that I am no longer at war with myself. He rose and approached her, taking her hand in his. I hope I have been some small part of that peace. You were the storm before it, she said, but I would weather it again. They dined quietly that evening, the table dressed in simple linens, the food unpretentious. There was no audience, no test to pass, just two people learning the shape of each other's company, again and again. After supper, they walked the path behind the house, through the orchard, and up toward a hill where the sky stretched wide above them. "I once thought I had to be fierce to be free," Katherina said as they walked. "And now? Now I know freedom is choosing who I become, not who others say I must be." He squeezed her hand. "And who have you chosen to be, Kate?" She stopped and looked at him, her eyes calm. "A woman who listens and speaks in equal measure. A wife, not by ownership, but by affection. A soul unafraid of love." The wind shifted through the trees, sending a soft rustle across the hill. They sat on a fallen log, watching the sun lower itself behind the distant peaks. "Do you miss the fire?" he asked. "The swordplay, the defiance? It's not gone," she said. "It's here, but I choose when to draw it. That's the difference," he chuckled. "I'll remember to tread carefully." They sat in silence as dusk melted into evening. Stars began to emerge, one by one, timid at first, then bold in their brilliance. "Never did have a wedding portrait," Petruchio said. "We were too busy arguing about your hat. Still the worst hat I ever wore. And you wore it just to prove a point. Many points, actually." She leaned against him. "We are fools, you and I." "Yes," he agreed. "But happy ones." Back at the house, the fire crackled and the night deepened. Katherina prepared for bed, brushing her hair with slow, deliberate strokes. She watched herself in the mirror, not with scrutiny but with a quiet recognition. This woman looking back at her was no longer fighting for space in the world. She had carved it, claimed it, and now she simply lived in it. When she returned to their bedchamber, Petruchio was already beneath the covers, reading. He looked up. "Well?" She blew out the candle and slipped beside him. "I love you," she said. He turned to her, surprised by the simplicity of it. "You say it so easily now." "Because it no longer costs me anything." He kissed her forehead. "And I love you, Kate. Not because you changed for me, but because you let me see who you were beneath the armor." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, no longer adversaries, no longer strangers. Just two souls, equal in fire and in grace, whose love had been earned, not given. And in that love, fierce and quiet and wholly theirs, the shrew was no longer tamed. She was simply at peace.